Hello, and welcome to the first installment of the podcast of Cory Doctorow's story, Superman and the Bugout. I'm Cory Doctorow, and this is my story. The story was initially printed in On Spec magazines, Canadian National Science Fiction magazine. On Spec also published my very first story, a not very good one called 2,000 Year Checkup that I wrote when I was 17, and they published it, or 16, they published it when I was 17 in their special youth issue. And that was my very first story publication in a magazine. I was very, very proud of it. I remain very proud of it, I think. This story, Superman and the Bugout, it's the conclusion of the triptych of stories that you've heard if you've been listening to this podcast. The first one was Shadow of the Mothership, and the second one was the one I just wrapped up, Home Again, Home Again. And this is the last of them. And I think next I'm going to be reading you a story called Visit the Sins, which was picked up for one of the year's best science fiction anthologies. This story was reprinted in my short story collection, A Place So Foreign and Eight More, from Four Walls, Eight Windows Press in 2003. I'm going to read you this one as a three-parter. It's a Jewish superhero story, and I guess there have been a few of those. I was raised by very secular Jews in Toronto. My parents were lefty Reds who'd given up religion. My grandparents were and are pretty observant. And, being Jewish has always been a part of my identity, but not in a kind of religious way, in a cultural way. Lots of people have written some good stories about what Superman is like. You may have seen Neil Gaiman had an article in this month's Wired magazine about the myth of Superman. There was a great old Larry Niven article or short story or something, humor piece called Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex that I quite commend to you. So the story draws on a lot of real-life experience I had growing up in Toronto, growing up in the peace movement. You'll see that this is about Superman as a Canadian. So as a Canadian, he's involved in peacekeeping and not in this kind of military adventurism. You may have seen a great comic book about Superman growing up in the Soviet Union and being a force for the Soviet, which I thought was quite good as well. One detail that I thought I would mention, and by way of a plug, is there's a restaurant in it, an Ethiopian restaurant on Bloor Street by Dufferin that appears under the name the Belkis, but it's in reality called the Queen of Sheba, and it is one of the finest Ethiopian restaurants I've ever eaten in. And if you ever find yourself in Toronto looking for a really good Ethiopian meal, you could do far worse than to pop into the Queen of Sheba. Also, cheap as chips. So that's your tip for the day. I'm off tomorrow. I'm headed to Hawaii for a friend's wedding, which is going to be very exciting, and then to Nashville for the Red Hat Conference, which is also going to be exciting. I'm one of the keynoters there, and then back to London to finish packing up and getting my life together to move to Los Angeles in like 6 weeks. So if you sent me email and I've been a little curt in replying or have just said, sorry, whatever it is you're asking, the answer is no, I don't have any time to answer it. That's why. It's just a madhouse around here. Of course, the writing is still going really well, and the new novel, the young adult novel, The Little Brother, gosh, I'm so excited to be writing it. It gets more interesting and more fun to write every single day. So here's part one of Superman and the Bugout. You'll hear the other two parts just as soon as I can post them from my journey on the road, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Bye. The Superman and the Bugout by Cory Doctorow. Originally published in On Spec magazine, fall 2001. Reprinted in the short story collection, A Place So Foreign and Eight More, from Four Walls, Eight Windows Press, 2003. Mama, I'm not a supervillain, Hershey said for the millionth time. He chased the last of the gravy on his plate with a hunk of dark rye, skirting the shriveled derma left behind from his kishka. Ever since the Bugouts had inducted Earth to the Galactic Federation, promising to end war, crime, and corruption, he'd found himself at loose ends. His adoptive Earth mother, who'd named him Hershey Abramowitz, had talked him into meeting her at a favorite restaurant in the heart of Toronto's Gaza Strip. Not a supervillain, he says. Listen to him, Mr. Big Stuff. Well, Mr. Smarty Pants, if you're not a supervillain, what was that mess on television last night? A busboy refilled their water, and Hershey took a long sip, staring off into the middle distance. Lately, he'd taken to avoiding looking at his mother. Her infrared signature was like a landing strip for a coronary, and she wouldn't let him take her to one of the Bugout clinics for nanosurgery. Mrs. Abramowitz leaned across the table and whacked him upside the head with one hand, her big rings clicking against the temple of his half-rimmed specs. Had it been anyone else, he would have caught her hand mid-slap, or at least dodged it in a super-fast blur, quicker than any human eye. But his mama had let him know what she thought of that sass before his 3rd birthday. Raising super-infants requires strict, loving discipline. "Hey, wake up! Hey, I'm talking to you! What was that mess on television last night?" "It was a demonstration, Mama. We were protesting. We want them to dismantle the machines of war. It's in the Torah. Isaiah. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Tot would have approved." Miss Abramowitz sucked air between her teeth. "Your father never would have approved of that." That was the action last night. It had been his idea, and he tossed it around with the movement people who'd planned the demo. They'd gone to an army surplus store and purchased hundreds of decommissioned rifles, their bores filled with lead, their firing pins defanged. He'd flown above and ahead of the demonstration in his traditional tights and cape, dragging a cargo net full of rifles from his belt. He pulled them out one at a time and bent them into balloon animals, fanciful giraffes, wiener dogs, bumblebees, and poodles, and passed them out to the crowds lining Yonge Street. It had been a boffo smash hit, and it made great TV. Hershey Abramowitz, man from the stars, took his mother's hands between his own and looked into her eyes. "Mama, I'm a grown man. I have a job to do. It's like a calling. The world's still a big place, bugouts or no bugouts, and there's lots of people here who are crazy, wicked, with their fingers on the triggers. I care about this planet, and I can't sit by when it's in danger." "But why all of a sudden do you have to be off with these Meshuggahs? How come you didn't need to be with the crazy people until now?" "Because there's a chance now. The world is ready to rethink itself. Because—" The waiter saved him by appearing with the check. His mother started to open her purse, but he had his debit card on the table faster than the eye could follow. "This one's on me, Ma." "Don't be silly. I'll pay." "I want to. Let me. A son should take his mother out to lunch once in a while." She smiled for the first time that whole afternoon and patted his cheek with one manicured hand. "You're a good boy, Hershey. I know that. I only want that you should be happy and have what's best for you." Hershey, in tights and cape, was chilling in his fortress of solitude when his comm rang. He checked the caller ID and winced. Thomas was calling from Toronto. Hershey's long-distance bills were killing him ever since the Department of Defense had cut off his freebie account. Not to mention that talking to Thomas inevitably led to more trouble with his mother. He got up off his crystalline recliner and flipped the comm open, floating up a couple of meters. "Thomas, what's up?" "Soup, did you see the reviews? The critics love us!" Hirsch held the comm away from his head and sighed, the ancient, put-upon, Hebraic sigh of his departed stepfather. Thomas Aquino Rusk liked to play at being a sleazy Broadway producer, his plays the eye-catching demonstrations he and his band of merry shit-disturbers hijacked. Yeah, it was a pretty good vid, all right. He didn't ask why Thomas was calling. There was only one reason Thomas ever called. He'd had another idea. "You'll never guess why I called. You've had an idea." "I've had an idea!" "Really? You're gonna love it." Hershey reached out and stroked the diamond-faceted coffins that his birth parents lay in, hoping for guidance. His warm fingers slicked with the melted hoarfrost, and as they skated over the crypt it sang a pure, high crystal note like a crippled flying saucer plummeting to the earth. "I'm sure I will, Thomas." As usual, Thomas chose not to hear the sarcasm in his voice. "Check this out. Defense Fest 33 is being held in Toronto in March, and the new keynote speaker is the patron Ixper Pat. The head frickin' Bugout. His address is Galactic History and Military Tactics, a Strategic Overview." "And this is a good thing?" "Oh, fuck no. It's terrible, terrible, of course. The Bugouts are selling us out, going over to the other side. Just awful. But think of the possibilities." "Think of the possibilities. Oi." Despite himself, Hershey was smiling. Thomas always made him smile. "You're smiling, aren't you?" "Shut up, Thomas." "Can you make a meeting at the Belkis for 18 hours? Hershey checked his comm. It was 17:20. "I can make it." "See you there, buddy." Thomas rang off. Hershey folded his comm, wedged it in his belt, and stroked his parents' crypts once more, for luck. Hershey loved the commute home. Starting out at the Arctic Circle, he flew up and up and up, above the highest clouds, then flattened out his body and rode the currents home, eeling around the wet, frozen cloud masses, slaloming through thunderheads, his critical faculties switched off, flying at speed on blind instinct alone. He usually made visual contact with the surface around Barrie, just outside of Toronto, and he wasn't such a goody-goody that he didn't feel a thrill of superiority as he flew over the cottage country commuters stuck in the end-of-weekend traffic, skis and snowmobiles strapped to their roofs. The Belle Keys had the best Ethiopian food and worst Ethiopian decor in town. Successive generations of managers had added their own touches: tiki lanterns, textured wallpaper, framed photos of Haile Selassie, tribal spears and grass dolls, and they'd accreted in layers until the net effect was of an African rummage sale. But man, the food was good. Downstairs was a banquet room whose decor consisted of material too ugly to be shown upstairs, with a stage and a disco ball. It had been a regular meeting place for Toronto's radicals for more than 50 years, and the chairs were worn smooth by generations of left-wing buttocks. Tonight it was packed. At least 50 people were crowded around the tables, tearing off hunks of tangy rice pancake and scooping up vegetarian curry with them. Even before he saw Thomas, his super hearing had already picked his voice out of the din and located it. Hershey made a beeline for Thomas's table, not making eye contact with the others, old guard activists who still saw him as a tool of the war machine. Thomas licked his finger clean and shook his hand. "Soup, glad you could make it. Sit, sit." There was a general shuffling of coats and chairs as the other people at the table cleared a space for him. Thomas was already pouring him a beer out of one of the pitchers on the table. "Geez, how many people did you invite?" Tina, a Chinese woman who could rhyme hey hey ho ho and 1 2 3 4 with amazing facility, said, "Everyone's here. The Quakers, the commies, a couple of counselors, the vets, anyone we could think of. This is going to be huge." The food was hot, and the different curries and salads were a symphony of flavors and textures. "This is terrific," he said. "Best Ethiopian outside of Addis Ababa," said Thomas. Better than Addis Ababa, Hershey thought, but didn't say it. He'd been in Addis Ababa as the secret weapon behind Canada's third and most ill-fated peacekeeping mission there. There hadn't been a lot of restaurants open then, just block after block of bombed-out buildings, and tribal warlords driving around in tacticals, firing randomly at anything that moved. His ground CO sent him off to scatter bands of marauders while the bullets spanged off his chest. He'd never understood the tactical significance of those actions. He still didn't, but at the time he'd been willing to trust those in authority. "It's good food," he said. An hour later, the pretty waitress had cleared away the platters and brought fresh pitchers, and Hershey's tights felt a little tighter. One of the Quakers, an ancient, skinny man with thin gray hair and sharp, clever features, stood up and tapped his beer mug. Gradually, conversation subsided. "Thank you," he said. "My name is Stuart Pocock, and I'm here from the Circle of Friends. I'd like us all to take a moment to say silent thanks for this wonderful food we've all enjoyed." There was a nervous shuffling and then a general bowing of heads, and mostly silence broken by low whispers. "Thomas, I thought you called this meeting," Hershey whispered. "I did. These guys always do this. Control freaks. Don't worry about it," he whispered back. "Thank you all. We took the liberty of drawing up an agenda for this meeting." "They always do this," Thomas said. The Quakers led them in a round of introductions, which came around to Hershey. "I'm, the Superman? I guess most of you know that, right?" Silence. "I'm really looking forward to working on this with you all." Another moment of silence followed, before the next table started in on its own introductions. "Time," Louise Pocock said, blissfully, at last. The agenda had ticks next to introduction, background, strategy, the day, support and organizing, and publicity. Thomas had hardly spoken a word through the course of the meeting. Even Hershey's alien buttocks were numb from the sitting. "It's time for the closing circle. Please, everybody, stand up and hold hands." Many of the assembled didn't bother to stifle their groans. Awkwardly around the tables and the knapsacks, they formed a rough circle and took hands. They held it for a long, painful moment, then gratefully let go. They worked their way upstairs and outside. The wind had picked up, and it blew Hershey's cape out in a crackling vertical behind him, so that it caught many of the others in the face as they cycled or walked away. "Soup, let's you and me grab a coffee, huh?" Thomas said, without any spin on it at all, so that Hershey knew that it wasn't a casual request. Yeah, sure. The cafe Thomas chose was in a renovated bank, and there was a private room in the old vault, and they sat down there, away from prying eyes and autograph hounds. "So, you pumped?" Thomas said, after they ordered their coffees. "After that meeting? Yeah, sure." Thomas laughed, a slightly patronizing but friendly laugh. "That was a great meeting. Look, if those guys had their way, we'd have about one march a month, and we'd walk slowly down a route that we had a permit for, politely asking people to see our point of view. And in between, we'd have a million meetings like this, where we came up with brilliant ideas like, let's hand out flyers next time. So what we do is we go along with them. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. Let them have 4 or 5 of those until everyone who shows up is so bored they'll do anything as long as it's not that. So these guys want to stage a sit-in in front of the convention center. Boring. We wait until they're ready to sit down, and then we start playing music and turn it into a dance-in. Start playing movies on the side of the building. Bring in 100 secret agents in costume to add to it. They'll never know what hit 'em." Hershey squirmed. These kinds of Machiavellian shenanigans came slowly to him. "That seems kind of, well, disingenuous, Thomas. Why don't we just hold our own march?" "And split the movement? Nah, this is much better. Those guys do all the postering and phoning, get a good crowd out. That's their natural role. Our natural role, my son," he placed a friendly hand on Hershey's caped shoulder, "is to see to it their efforts aren't defeated by their own poverty of imagination. They are the feet of the movement, but we're its laugh." Thomas pulled out his comm and scribbled on its surface. "They're the feet of the movement, but we're its laugh. That's great. That's one for the memoirs."